Action cameras have been around for a while, offering a convenient way to capture your adventures with minimal fuss. But with the GoPro Hero Black 13, the focus shifted to new lens mods like ND filters designed to turn them into more serious filmmaking tools. Recently, Freewell sent me these ND filters to review, and in this video I'll show you how they transformed my DJI Osmo Action 5 Pro's footage from this to this, and helped me get nice motion blur across my videos. I'll also dig into a common challenge with ND filters on action cameras, which is their complicated relationship with electronic image stabilization, and walk you through 2 effective ways to manage it, all without needing the use of a gimbal. So first of all, what do ND filters actually do, and why would you even need them? Let's take a look at some sample footage I recorded using automatic settings. Notice how in this 24 FPS scene, the video looks particularly jittery and staccato-like. The footage is much less jarring at 30 FPS, but it still doesn't quite achieve that cinematic look. The main reason for this is the lack of motion blur, which is a key element in creating cinematic visuals. When we record in auto in bright settings, the Osmo Action 5 Pro uses a fast shutter speed to properly expose the shot. This means each frame is extremely sharp with almost no motion blur. The only way to safely bring down the shutter speed and achieve that nice motion blur is by using ND filters. Shooting in bright conditions without an ND filter can result in overexposed and blown out footage like this. These ND filters from Freewell, compatible with the Osmo Action 3, 4 and 5, are easy to attach to the Osmo Action 5 Pro. You will need to however select an ND filter with the appropriate ND rating based on the brightness levels around you. During testing, I found myself using the ND8 and ND16 most of the time, mainly because the weather has been very cloudy recently. Now let's cover how to use these ND filters effectively. In videography, there's something known as the 180-degree shutter rule, which is a guideline for setting shutter speed to create natural and cinematic looking motion blur. According to this rule, the shutter speed should be set to double your frame rate. So if you're shooting at 30 frames per second, your shutter speed should be set to 1/60th of a second. By enabling the Pro mode when you're recording a video, we can manually set the shutter speed to 1/60 when recording at 30 FPS. Thanks to ND filters, we avoid overexposing our footage. Let's see the difference it makes. As you can see, the footage appears jittery with signs of ghosting. This happens due to 2 main factors. At this low shutter speed, each frame has significant motion blur, while electronic image stabilization requires sharper frames to align reference points accurately. Additionally, although the RockSteady algorithm uses gyro data in addition to simple image analysis, it still merges blurred frames, which creates smearing artifacts in the stabilized footage. Now, if we're using a gimbal to handle our stabilization instead, or if we are riding a motorbike on a very smooth road, this wouldn't be as big of an issue, but on a bicycle or when walking, the camera shake is much harder to compensate for. So a common approach to deal with this issue is to simply not strictly follow the 180-degree shutter rule. Instead, we lower the shutter speed to a value which still produces some motion blur, but allows the electronic image stabilization to work without severely impacting the footage. On the Osmo Action 5 Pro, a shutter speed of around 1/200th of a second works pretty well. While the results aren't as cinematic, it still gives us some motion blur, and it makes the footage look smoother and less choppy compared to clips that were shot using higher shutter speeds. However, I also had success with an alternative approach where I was able to bring down the shutter speed to 1/60th of a second for truly natural motion blur and without getting the dizzying artifacts I encountered before. This method uses third-party software called Gyroflow to handle the stabilization instead of relying on the DJI Osmo Action 5 Pro's built-in RockSteady stabilization. Gyroflow stabilizes footage by using gyro data, so to ensure our footage includes this extra data, we need to turn the stabilization to off in the Osmo Action 5 settings. Now we can capture raw, unstabilized footage, which doesn't suffer from ghosting, but is a bit too shaky to use as is. Now let's see what happens when I import this video file into Gyroflow. With the default settings, here's what I get. It turns out we're facing the same issue as before, noticeable artifacts from too much stabilization. The advantage of Gyroflow, however, is that it gives us control over the level of stabilization we want to apply. By lowering the smoothness slider, we can achieve footage that's much more stable than the source video while still staying free from those EIS artifacts. While the result isn't as perfectly smooth or drone-like as RockSteady, it's not shaky to the extent of being unusable, and I actually quite like the natural amount of camera shake I was getting in these videos. While the Gyroflow method worked well for bike footage and should perform similarly in other relatively stable scenarios, the results weren't as effective for walking shots. Here's some unstabilized walking footage. And here's what I got after applying a minimal level of stabilization in Gyroflow. Unfortunately, there's still too much camera shake in the stabilized video, and increasing the smoothness slider much further will begin to introduce noticeable EIS artifacting. So if you're filming while walking, I'd suggest either increasing the shutter speed to around 1/200th of a second as I mentioned before, or using a gimbal if you can for mechanical stabilization. So are ND filters worth buying for the DJI Osmo Action 5 Pro, or any action camera for that matter? Well, they're definitely not for everyone. Using them does add complexity to your workflow, since you'll now need to select the right ND filter based on lighting conditions, and also find a way to manage the EIS issue, whether that means using a gimbal, adjusting your shutter speed instead of strictly following the 180-degree shutter rule, or finding the stabilization sweet spot in Gyroflow. However, if you're aiming to improve the production quality of your footage and are already capturing relatively smooth shots like on a bicycle or motorbike, ND filters are definitely worth considering. They'll not only give your footage a more natural look, but they can also greatly enhance the sense of speed in your videos.